The execution, that wasn't. The rain poured in thick, heavy sheets, drenching the rocky surface of Karshar, a backwater planet under Xalrek Dominion control. The air smelled of damp stone and scorched metal, remnants of the last battle that had ended only hours ago. The Xalrek had crushed the human insurgents who had dared to resist their rule. Or so they thought. Captain Threxel stood with his squad of elite Dominion soldiers, towering reptilian beings with obsidian-black armor and plasma rifles slung across their chests. Their prisoner knelt before them, Sergeant Daniel Carter, the last surviving human from the skirmish. His uniform was torn, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but his expression was eerily calm. Threxel's mandibles twitched in amusement. "Human," he hissed in the guttural Xalrek tongue, "you fought well, but your kind is weak. You bleed too easily." Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "You talk too much." A murmur of irritation passed through the Xalrek soldiers. Threxel bared his fangs. "You think this is funny?" He raised his plasma pistol, aiming directly at Carter's chest. "Let's see if you're still laughing when you're dead." Without another word, Threxel fired. A bolt of searing orange plasma struck Carter square in the chest. The blast illuminated the darkened outpost, sending a sizzling sound through the air. For a moment, silence hung heavy over the scene. The Xalrek soldiers waited for the human to collapse, to scream in agony. Instead, Carter grinned. Then he laughed. A deep, genuine, almost amused chuckle that sent a shiver through Threxel's spine. The squad shifted uneasily. Plasma shots at this range should have incinerated organic tissue. Carter should be dead. Threxel took a step back. Impossible. Carter exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. A smoldering hole had burned through his chest plate, but beneath it, his skin was barely singed. "Not bad," he said, patting his armor. That tickled a little. A second of stunned silence. Then the human moved. Faster than the Xalrek expected, Carter surged forward, headbutting the nearest soldier. The force cracked the alien's helmet, sending him sprawling. Before another could react, Carter lunged, grabbing Threxel's wrist and twisting it violently. The plasma pistol fell to the ground. "Shoot him!" Threxel snarled. A soldier fired, but Carter was already moving. The blast missed, scorching the dirt where he had stood a moment before. Carter dropped low, sweeping the legs out from under another Xalrek. In a flash, he snatched the fallen plasma pistol and shot one of the remaining soldiers square in the chest. The Xalrek weren't used to prey fighting back. Threxel scrambled backward, his heart pounding. This wasn't possible. Humans weren't this fast. Humans weren't this strong. Carter cocked his head, inspecting the weapon in his hands. "Neat little sidearm," he mused, then leveled it at the nearest Xalrek. "Mind if I borrow it?" The remaining 3 soldiers hesitated, fear flickering in their reptilian eyes. Carter was outnumbered, but none of them wanted to be the next one he came for. "Fall back," Threxel barked. The squad scrambled away, their previous arrogance replaced with terror. Carter smiled, watching them retreat. He wiped the rain from his brow and exhaled. His chest still stung, but he'd endured worse. A standard-issue plasma round wasn't enough to put a human down. Not when adrenaline was pumping, not when his body had spent years adapting to pain. He flexed his fingers, adjusting to the weight of his new weapon. Then, stepping forward into the darkness, he began the hunt. Tonight, the Xalrek had learned a crucial lesson. Humans are not weak. They just hadn't realized it yet. The hunters become the hunted. Captain Threxel ran. The rain had turned the rocky terrain of Karshar into a treacherous, mud-slick battlefield. His pulse pounded in his ears as he and his remaining soldiers stumbled through the darkness, their claws slipping against the wet ground. Plasma rifles hummed in their hands, their glowing barrels cutting through the shadows. This was supposed to be a simple execution, a routine extermination of a lesser species. Instead, they were the ones being hunted. Threxel barely registered the pain in his wrist, still throbbing from where the human, Sergeant Daniel Carter, had twisted it. His mind was clouded by something far worse, fear. "This is impossible," muttered one of his soldiers, Vecris, his voice trembling. "The human should be dead." Threxel didn't answer. He had no explanation for what had happened. He had shot Carter point blank with a plasma pistol, enough to kill most creatures in the galaxy. But the human had only laughed. And then he had fought back. A burst of plasma fire cut through the rain, striking the rocky outcrop just inches from Threxel's head. He ducked instinctively. "He's toying with us?" shouted Xalrek, another soldier, panic rising in his voice. Threxel bared his fangs. No, he wouldn't be hunted like some prey animal. He was Xalrek, a species bred for war, conquerors of over 100 worlds. They would regroup, lay a trap, and kill this abomination. "Into the ruins," he barked, pointing toward the remains of a shattered human settlement. The structures were skeletal, blackened from past bombardments. There, they could make a stand. The squad sprinted inside, positioning themselves behind collapsed walls and rusted metal debris. The rain dripped through the broken ceilings, casting eerie echoes through the empty structures. Threxel steadied his breathing. "He's just one human," he growled. "We are Xalrek warriors. We will kill him." A shadow moved. The soldiers snapped their weapons up, scanning the darkness. Silence. Then a chuckle. Low. Amused. Predatory. Threxel's blood turned to ice. A streak of movement. Carter sprang from the shadows, tackling Vecrus with terrifying speed. The Xalrek barely had time to scream before the human's knife sank into his throat, silencing him instantly. Xalrek turned to fire, but Carter was already moving. He lunged, grabbing the alien's rifle and yanking it upward. The shot went wide, melting a hole in the ceiling. Carter drove his elbow into Xalrek's snout, shattering bone, then finished him with a precise shot to the head. 2 down. Threxel and the last soldier, Carvax, scrambled backward, firing wildly. Plasma bolts scorched the walls, but Carter was already gone, melted into the shadows like a ghost. Threxel's breathing was ragged. He had fought countless battles, wiped out entire species, but nothing like this had ever happened. "This isn't possible," Carvax whispered. His rifle shook in his hands. "How does he keep moving? He should be dead." A voice echoed through the ruins, Carter's voice. Calm, mocking. "You think plasma's enough to stop a human?" Carvax spun, firing blindly. The shot struck empty air. Threxel clenched his jaw. The human was playing with them. "Show yourself, coward," he roared. A rustle, a shadow overhead. Too late. Carter dropped from above, slamming both feet into Carvax's chest. The impact sent the Xalrek flying, crashing against a metal beam with a sickening crunch. His body slumped, unmoving. Now, only Threxel remained. The Xalrek captain's claws tightened around his weapon. His breathing was ragged, his vision blurred by rain and fear. He could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling him in the darkness. Then Carter stepped into the light, his face streaked with rain and blood. His lips curled into that same unnerving grin. "Looks like it's just you and me now, Captain." Threxel aimed his rifle. His hands trembled. What are you?" he rasped. Carter's eyes gleamed. "Human." Then he lunged. The truth about humanity. Threxel fired, but Carter was already moving. The plasma bolt streaked through the air, missing by inches. Before Threxel could correct his aim, a brutal punch crashed into his jaw. His vision exploded in white pain, and he felt his feet leave the ground. The next thing he knew, he was slammed against the cold, wet metal floor, his rifle torn from his grasp. Carter stood over him, calm, breathing steady, as if the past hour of battle had meant nothing to him. His eyes weren't filled with rage or cruelty, just cold amusement, as if he had already won. Threxel groaned, trying to move, but Carter pressed a boot to his chest, pinning him down. "Funny thing about you, Xalrek," Carter said, tilting his head. "You've spent centuries conquering weaker species. You roll over them, call yourselves unstoppable." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "And yet, you've never fought us before, have you?" Threxel gritted his teeth. "You're just flesh and bone," he spat. "You shouldn't be standing. You shouldn't be alive." Carter chuckled. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Threxel felt a surge of fury. He wasn't going to die like this. With a snarl, he lashed out with his claws, aiming straight for the human's throat. Carter caught his wrist mid-swing. The Xalrek's entire arm locked in place. Threxel's breath hitched. He had cybernetic strength enhancements, his body modified for war. Yet Carter held him still with nothing but raw muscle and leverage. Carter slowly forced Threxel's arm back down, almost lazily. "You don't get it, do you?" Carter murmured. "You think humans are weak, that we break easy." He leaned closer. "Let me tell you a little secret." His grip tightened. "We don't break." Threxel screamed as his own wrist snapped under the pressure. He writhed in agony, but Carter just stood there, watching him like a predator watching a wounded animal. "You don't understand what humans are, do you?" Carter continued, his voice eerily casual. "See, your kind has always had the advantage. Claws, armor, plasma weapons. You were born strong. You never had to struggle, never had to adapt." Threxel panted, clutching his ruined wrist. But humans?" Carter cut him off. "We weren't born strong. We were born fragile, weak. Everything on our planet wanted to kill us. And for millions of years, it almost did. We had to evolve, learn, get smarter, get tougher. We weren't given anything. We had to earn it." Threxel swallowed hard. "So what? You think you're superior?" Carter shook his head. "No, but I think we're scarier." He crouched beside the wounded captain, his voice dropping lower. "You Xalrek fight wars with firepower, with technology. You win fast. But humans?" Carter smirked. "We win wars by dragging them out, by making it a game of endurance. You ever heard of the death marches from our history? Soldiers forced to march for days without food, dying where they stood? Some of them kept going anyway. We've survived ice ages, volcanic winters, and nuclear war. Hell, even our primitive ancestors could run prey into the ground for days until it simply collapsed from exhaustion." He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "And you think a plasma shot to the chest is enough to stop us?" Threxel's body trembled. He had never feared an enemy like this before, never imagined such a thing existed. Carter exhaled, standing up straight. "I could kill you right now," he said. "But I won't." Threxel's eyes darted upward. "What?" "I want you to go back to your people," Carter said. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them what you saw." He stepped back, gesturing toward the jungle. "Tell your Dominion that if they come for Earth, they better be ready for a fight they can't win." Threxel was silent. Then, shakily, he rose to his feet. He staggered away, glancing at the corpses of his fallen soldiers. His entire squad, wiped out by one human. He didn't say a word. He just ran. Carter watched him go, then sighed. Aliens never learn. He holstered his stolen plasma pistol, turned, and disappeared into the jungle. The war that never happened. The halls of the Xalrek Dominion High Command were vast and imposing, lined with banners displaying the Dominion's conquests across the galaxy. But tonight, they felt small, suffocating, at least to Captain Threxel. He stood before the Warlord's Council, his body rigid, his wrist still weak from where the human had snapped it like a twig. He had barely survived his encounter with Sergeant Daniel Carter, and now, under the piercing gazes of the Dominion's most powerful leaders, he had to explain why. "You ran," one of the warlords growled, his deep voice filled with contempt. "You, an elite warrior of the Dominion, fled from a single human." Threxel clenched his fists. "I survived," he said, "so I could deliver a warning." Murmurs of irritation rippled through the chamber. These were beings who had never known fear. Threxel had. "The humans," he continued, "are not what we believe them to be. They're not weak. They are not fragile." Another warlord scoffed. "You expect us to believe that? One primitive managed to defeat your entire squad." Threxel's mandibles tightened. "Not just defeat. Hunt. He hunted us. He was faster than we expected. Stronger. Smarter. Relentless. He swallowed. We shot him at point-blank range. He should have died." He laughed instead. Silence fell over the chamber. The warlords exchanged glances. Some of them still looked unconvinced. Others, however, looked uneasy. Threxel continued, voice firm. "I have studied their history. Humans have survived extinction-level events on their own world. They are designed to endure, to outlast. And unlike us, they do not conquer through superior firepower alone. They conquer through persistence, through sheer, terrifying will. One of the oldest warlords, Lord Krelnak, leaned forward. His reptilian eyes were cold, calculating. Are you saying the Dominion would lose in a war against them? Threxel hesitated. Then, slowly, he said, I am saying we would never win. A murmur spread through the room. The Xalrek never backed down from a fight. They had crushed entire civilizations under their heel. But for the first time, doubt had crept into the chamber. Lord Krelnak studied Threxel carefully. Tell me, Captain, what did the humans say before he let you live? Threxel exhaled, recalling the moment Carter had stood over him, unbroken, unafraid. He told me to deliver a message. He admitted. The warlords waited. Threxel lifted his head and spoke the words Carter had told him to repeat. Tell your Dominion that if they come for Earth, they better be ready for a fight they can't win. The chamber fell silent. The warlords, one by one, turned to Lord Krelnak, one of the few leaders old enough to remember a time when the Dominion had lost wars. His face was unreadable. Then, finally he spoke. Withdraw all forces from human space, Krelnak commanded. A ripple of shock went through the room. Lord Krelnak, one of the warlords began. Do you dispute my decision? Krelnak's voice was quiet, but it held the weight of centuries of conquest. The warlord who had spoken lowered his head in submission. Krelnak turned back to Threxel. You are certain of this, Captain? Threxel nodded once. More certain than I have ever been. Krelnak considered this for a long moment, then finally leaned back. The war with humanity is over, he said, before it even begins. Earth, weeks later. Sergeant Daniel Carter sat on the edge of a military outpost's landing pad, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The stars stretched endlessly above him, the quiet hum of Earth's defense systems running in the background. His CO, Colonel Vasquez, stepped up beside him, arms crossed. So, she said, we just got an official transmission from the Xalrek Dominion. They've withdrawn their forces. No explanation, no demands. Just pulled out. Carter smirked. Vasquez eyed him. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Carter took a slow sip of his coffee. I might have had a little chat with them. Vasquez sighed, shaking her head. One of these days, Carter, you're going to piss off the wrong species. Carter grinned. Maybe, but today's not that day. She chuckled, then patted his shoulder. Good work, soldier. As Vasquez walked off, Carter took another sip, watching the night sky. Somewhere out there, an entire empire had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate humanity. He chuckled to himself. They had shot a human, expecting him to die. Instead, he had laughed.